About the state of our law enforcement systems on the streets and behind bars. A grand jury says Multnomah County's jails are turning into holding cells for people with mental health issues. Meantime, the back and forth continues between Portland police, the city, and the feds over whether to put body cameras on officers.
Who controls the data? Who can change it? Who can view it? What can it be used for? When are they turned on?
And to the north, Clark County is stuck in body camera limbo too, after voters rejected a confusing sales tax measure that would have funded that program.
I am 100% behind finding the money to support this program. It has to happen.
Here's the story.
Hey everybody, welcome to The Story. I'm Maggie Vespa. You might have noticed I was off for a few days, and I want to thank Pat Doris for holding down the fort incredibly well. That's not shocking. That's what he does. We appreciate him, and we appreciate you at home as well. If you're not familiar, this is the show where we take your questions and your comments and we turn them into content, as you'll see. So email thestory@kgw.com. Use that hashtag, TheStoryKGW. A little bit of a theme, as you can tell. Our team is watching for your feedback as we speak. All right, enough of that. Let's get to our big story tonight. It is about our jails and a new report that described the situation inside as catastrophic. That's a quote. The highlights: the jail system in Multnomah County is understaffed and overwhelmed. Overwhelmed specifically with mental health patients who have nowhere else to go. I talked to Mike Benner about this earlier. Okay, so we're joined now by Mike Benner. And Mike, you have just read that 17-page corrections grand jury report. I mean, what are your takeaways?
Well, Maggie, I think that the staffing shortage is, of course, one of the takeaways. The other is a lack of mental health resources. But let's start with that staffing shortage. The grand jury described it as both a chronic and acute crisis. They noticed staff burnout and early retirements, all of it taking quite the toll on staff morale. The grand jury suggested the sheriff's office can improve staffing by offering hazard pay and assignment-based bonuses, maybe even hiring back some retirees.
So this is a familiar story. I mean, we know that staffing challenges are being reported across pretty much every industry at this point. So in this case, what has the sheriff said, if anything, about how he plans to address this?
The sheriff is not talking on camera, but he did release a statement, and he is calling this an immense challenge, adding that his office is already addressing the problem by ramping up recruitment, hiring, and retention efforts. Moving on to mental health, let's talk about our quote of the day. The jail system is beginning to serve as a de facto mental health hospital despite not being adequately equipped to serve such a function. That is based on witness statements to the grand jury. It appears the number of adults in custody suffering from mental health conditions and substance abuse has risen dramatically. The grand jury is advising the sheriff's office to focus on a few things. It starts with providing deputies with some mental health training, but also developing programs and hiring staff that can directly assist this vulnerable population.
So given all of that guidance, or at least those recommendations, what does the mental health staffing look like right now?
All right, so the grand jury found that there is one healthcare professional for every 6 adults in custody. Wow. They say staffing should be double, if not triple, the current levels. And Maggie, it is worth mentioning, this grand jury report was not all doom and gloom. The sheriff's office was applauded for its robust assortment of programs available to adults in custody and for hiring its first equity and inclusion manager, a position Multnomah County DA Mike Schmidt calls essential.
All right, an eye-opening report. Mike, thank you so much. Okay, let's turn to Portland police now. In fact, this morning it appeared the Bureau had a deal to equip officers with body cameras. But by midday, that deal had unraveled. The tentative agreement was part of a settlement between the city of Portland and the U.S. Department of Justice calling for police reform. So with that, let's bring in Kyle Aboshi, who has been following this body cam issue for several months at this point. So Kyle, bring us up to speed here.
Right, and first a little background for you. As we've been reporting, Portland is the largest police department in the country that doesn't have body cameras. It appears that was going to change for really a couple of reasons: money and politics. The mayor's proposed spending $2.6 million of the fall budget adjustment on body cameras, and he's got the support of city council. But there's another really important factor here. The feds are pushing the city to equip officers with body cams to meet demands of a 2014 settlement over police reform. Both the city and Department of Justice thought they had a done deal as of this morning. But when all parties got into court, things kind of fell apart. The judge ordered all involved to go back to mediation and figure out the details surrounding a body cam program.
Okay, so what is the issue here? I mean, if they had a deal, why did things fall apart?
Right. Well, several community activists who've been part of the settlement process all along told the judge the agreement doesn't really go far enough. They want it spelled out in the court record how the cameras will be used and whether officers can review the footage before giving statements or writing reports. This afternoon, I spoke with attorney Juan Chavez, who represents the Mental Health Alliance.
We have heard from DOJ what they are considering good metrics and policies for a body-worn camera policy. But again, if it's not in the agreement, who's to say it's enforceable? Who's to say that they're actually going to hold up their end of the bargain?
It seems as simple as put it in writing so we can guarantee this will happen in the end.
Precisely, yeah.
And that's the hope moving forward?
That is. This will go through several more hands. The parties are going to mediate. The community is going to have input. This will go before city council for a vote. This will go before the judge for another hearing. So we'll be seen again, but it's important that these issues are aired now, early, and often.
So the judge has asked lawyers from the city, the Justice Department, police union, and community groups to go back for one more mediation session to really try and hammer things out.
Okay. While I have you, we did get a question about this from a viewer that I want to bring up. Sheba emailed asking if the police union negotiates the purchase of cameras, then will they also determine how those cameras are used? It's interesting.
All right, a good question and really important point here. The city is negotiating with the police union right now. The union is supportive of body cams, but the two sides are still working through the details, including who can look at the video and when. Those negotiations between the city and the police union, they're happening behind closed doors, so we don't know what the current proposal really looks like.
Gotcha. So back to today's developments then. I mean, what does this mean, or what do we know about this means anyway, as far as timing? Like, how soon can we expect Portland police officers will actually be walking around equipped with body cameras?
The city council was scheduled to vote on this deal in early December, but again, that'll likely be pushed back. The original deal called for Portland to implement a body-worn camera program within about 7 months, which really is a pretty quick time frame. It's tough to say. Within the next year, I would say is optimistic, but it certainly could happen.
Okay. We will, of course, be watching. Kyle Laboshi, thank you.
So why don't Portland police wear body cameras? Well, it's a long story. So how did we get here? In the fall of 2014, a federal judge urged the city of Portland to put cameras on its officers, even though the U.S. Justice Department didn't require it. The mayor at the time, Charlie Hales, said sure. The Bureau even set aside money and held community hearings to get ideas. By 2015, things seemed to be on cruise control. The Oregon State Legislature passed a bill that created statewide standards for body cameras usage. The Portland City Council put aside more than $830,000 to put even more cameras in police cars. And the city pledged another $1.6 million to fund the program through the next fiscal year. Then, another year and a different mayor later, things hit a snag. Mayor Ted Wheeler questioned if the project was feasible and asked the Police Bureau for a detailed plan, including how much the cameras would cost. The police chief at the time, Mike Marshman, summed it up by saying that's, in a nutshell, why we don't have body cameras today. But fast forward to January of 2019, and there was another opportunity. Portland police formed a team to finally come up with that detailed plan the mayor wanted to see. And in February 2019, the city held listening sessions. A year later, in early 2020, then Chief Jamie Resch said she supported body cameras and hoped to see a pilot program in the future. But once again, the plan hit a snag because the COVID-19 pandemic blew out the city's budget, and the body camera pilot project was one of many things that ended up on the chopping block. But now there is funding available, and the police bureau, the police union, and city commissioners say they support body cameras. That being said, even if the city council does pass the funding for them, the city is still trying to hash out the details with the police union. The main issues: when and how the video will be released, and if officers will be able to watch it before writing their reports. And that's how we got here.
Yeah, like we said, a little bit of a saga. While all of that is happening in Portland, the city of Salem is moving forward with body cameras for its officers. That's according to the Salem Reporter. In fact, last night, the city council accepted a more than $800,000 grant from the state legislature to fund a body camera program. And they're hoping to get that one up and running in the first half of next year. We'll keep you posted. Now over to Clark County, where some cities like Camas are also moving ahead with putting body cameras on their officers. But last week's election brought a bit of a curveball, which elections never do. In short, voters shot down a sales tax that would have funded a program for sheriff's deputies. That being said, the tax was a little confusing. Here's Tim Gordon.
Camas is a growing small city of about 26,000 in eastern Clark County. City leaders here just put $311,000 into a police camera program. They saw it first as a way to abide by new statewide police reform laws that require recording all juvenile and adult felony interrogations.
We were thinking that one of the best ways we could attack that is by getting body-worn cameras that are available to all the officers all of the time.
But while Camas is pushing forward, Clark County is stuck in neutral. That's because a vote for a 0.1% sales tax failed in this month's election. Clark County councilors say Proposition 10 would have funded body cameras and the administrative costs for 30 years. The problem is Prop 10 didn't say anything about body cameras in its title. Instead, it was billed as a tax to fund juvenile and jail facilities.
But this in no way was to raise money for jails. And yes, it was confusing, and it wasn't our doing.
Council Vice Chair Gary Medvigi says their hands were tied by legal advice that said the county could only ask for a sales tax in limited ways, and this way didn't work.
You know, we had a couple of options before we put this measure on the ballot.
County Councilor Julie Olson did not support putting Prop 10 on the ballot because of the confusion factor. She supported an alternative ballot plan, but the entire council supports body cams, so the delay is disappointing.
If we don't get another measure on the ballot until November of 2022, we're a full year behind when we could have gotten it started, made the purchase, and start beginning the program. So it does set us back.
I am 100% behind finding the money to support this program. It has to happen.
Medvigi says they will look to next year, and he will continue to spearhead efforts to find the money to get Clark County Sheriff's deputies equipped with cameras. In the meantime, Camas is getting started.
We want to be transparent. We know that agencies all across the country are using body-worn cameras, and it protects everybody involved. And so we're sure that we're probably going to get there. We're not quite there yet.
Tim Gordon, KGW News.
The governor's race in Oregon is in full swing, even though the election isn't for another year. But that's not stopping the campaigns from raising a bunch of money. There's one candidate in particular with a lot of out-of-state donors, including some famous names. We'll break it down when the story continues.
Hey guys, welcome back. Keep sending those questions and those comments into thestory@kgw.com or use the hashtag thestoryKGW on Twitter. And hey, by the way, I want to remind you now about our Hey Help campaign. This week we are asking you to consider donating to North Star Clubhouse. They're a recovery program in Northeast Portland for people who have experienced a mental health crisis or are struggling with any diagnosis and would just like to be around others who can relate. So to donate, hold your phone's camera up to this QR code. It'll take you to a donation page. You can also skip that step and go to kgw.com/heyhelp. And by the way, this is a micro donation drive, so feel free to give any amount, no matter how small. All right, buckle in because campaign season is getting into gear. I know, I'm exhausted too. The next big election is exactly a year away, and already candidates are raking in the funds, and we're talking about it. What's a year? I mean, so leading the pack for the governor's race, fundraising-wise, not a huge surprise, right? Former New York Times columnist Nick Kristof. His campaign reports in the less than 2 weeks since entering the race, he's raised more than $1 million. The vast majority of those funds are coming from out of state. That includes $50,000 from Melinda Gates, the ex-wife of Bill Gates. There's also $10,000 from Angelina Jolie. In fact, Kristof reports 233 out-of-state donors, including Angelina Jolie, have given him about $722,000 all together out of more than $1 million, so more than half. This is interesting because Kristof, as we've reported, is facing challenges over whether he's legally a resident of Oregon. He splits his time between Oregon and New York, and he voted in New York last year. In order to run for governor legally, you have to have lived in Oregon for at least 3 years leading up to the election. But Kristof's lawyers argue he meets the residency requirements. Again, they say he splits his time. And his campaign says the in-state cash flow is alive and well, too. More than 2,500 donations from 35 counties in Oregon. Donations of less than $100, by the way, are not required to be reported. So there could be more smaller ones. All right, with that said, let's see where the rest of the contenders stand now. On the Democratic side, House Speaker Tina Kotek has about $464,000, so a little less than half of what Kristof has on hand. State Treasurer Tobias Reed has about $328,000, and Yamhill County Commissioner Casey Kula has about $14,000. Over to the Republicans, Bridget Barton has about $241,000. Bud Pierce coming in with $204,000. Sandy Mayor Stan Pulliam, $192,000. And Baker City Mayor Carrie McQuiston has about $49,000. Keep an eye also on State Senator Betsy Johnson. She's a Democrat, but she's running as an unaffiliated candidate, and she's got more than $500,000. So fundraising wise, as of now, she's coming in second place behind Kristof. It's a lot of numbers. So why does any of that matter? Well, you don't have to be a political savant to know there is a strong association between money and victory. Obviously, fundraising gives a candidate a decent gauge on how much support they have, and it gives them resources to travel and to advertise. And remember, this election is wide open. There is no incumbent. Kate Brown can't run again. So we'll keep an eye on how all of that develops. In the meantime, let's talk about Congress because we're not stressed out enough. Oregon Representative Kurt Schrader has a challenger for the Democratic primary, Jamie McLeod Skinner, who ran for Secretary of State last year. She also ran against former Congressman Greg Walden in 2018. Now, it's worth noting, Schrader has gotten a lot of criticism from the left for his more moderate positions and for voting with Republicans on some issues. Most recently, in September, he broke with his party to block a bill that would have lowered prescription drug prices. So Schrader, it's also worth noting, will be running for re-election in a district that represents new areas. His district has changed. For the last 10 years, District 5 on the left, the old one, has included the southern part of the metro area. It's also included Salem and part of the central and north coast. Now, after redistricting, District 5 goes from the South Metro area down the eastern part of the Willamette Valley and across the Cascades over to Bend. It's changed a lot. Meantime, 2 seats on Portland City Council. Let's keep this going. They're opening up next year as well. Today, former state representative Akasha Lawrence Spence announced she would run to take Dan Ryan's seat. Ryan is finishing out late City Commissioner Nick Fish's term. Now, Lawrence Spence was appointed to the Oregon House in 2020, and she had said she was interested in running for state Senate, but redistricting will put her outside the boundary of District 18, which is the one that she wanted. But she tweeted today that she still wants to be appointed to the District 18 seat for now, and that's because it's currently vacant after State Senator Ginny Burdick retired earlier this month. But by 2022, Lawrence Spence will be out of that district when the lines are redrawn. She says she doesn't plan to move for a run for that seat. So Lawrence Spence, again, running for city council amid all of that. She is a small business owner and activist, and she says Portland needs more change to happen for the BIPOC community. All right, again, a year away, a lot to cover. Still ahead here tonight, Oregon and Washington are about to get a bunch of money from the president's new infrastructure plan. So does this mean that the interstate bridge is finally going to get replaced? We'll talk about it when the story continues. Welcome back, guys. So you might have seen President Biden is celebrating a big win after the House passed a huge infrastructure bill late last week. And when I say huge, I mean it. $1.2 trillion, trillion with a T. And lawmakers say over the next decade, that money will make changes in every corner of the country. They're comparing it to the Transcontinental Railroad or the interstate highway system. That's how big they say this is. So let's take a look at their plans and kind of narrow it down to our area. First, the infrastructure plan includes money to upgrade roads and bridges across the country. It also expands public transit, including Amtrak and airports, and it promotes electric vehicle usage with plans to add charging stations across the U.S. and electric school buses. There's also money earmarked for modernizing our electric grid, important for all those charging stations, and for expanding broadband internet access to rural, low-income and tribal communities. Now, we're going to be keeping a close eye on the money that comes in for roads and bridges, especially because you might have known we have a lot of bridges that are getting pretty old and many that are not ready for an earthquake. So we talked to the Oregon Department of Transportation, and they say they expect to get about $1.2 billion with a B dollars in new funding over the next 5 years. That being said, they're not sure yet which projects will get going first, but replacing the interstate bridge and the Rose Quarter Highway redesign, those will likely be high on the list. ODOT says this money, by the way, is not just coming to the state level. About $200 million will go to city and county governments for local projects.
Transportation is an issue that touches everyone's life in Oregon. So whether you're walking, whether you're, riding your skateboard, driving a car, hauling freight. When we talk about this touching every Oregonian, we mean it. Everyone uses the roads. A lot of people use those bike and pedestrian facilities. People use public transit. So this is really touching a lot of Oregonians' lives. And it's really it's really important that we have a safe and modern transportation system.
Let's head north now. Washington is set to get about $1.8 billion with a B, for their projects. And there's also money set aside to improve wildfire response. The White House says this plan will add about 2 million new jobs nationwide each year over the coming decade, 2 million per year. So there are a lot of pieces to this plan and a lot of details that still haven't been finalized. And we want to know your questions. What are you curious about in the infrastructure plan? Do you care more about improving our wildfire response or expanding internet access, repairing bridges? Do you want me to stop talking about this? Whatever you want, reach out, email thestory@kgw.com. Cue the music. It's like the Oscars. Or use that hashtag, #TheStoryKGW. We're going to finish the show right after this. Let's dig into the viewer questions box here. We have time for one more. This is from Julie. She wrote, I've understood that staying on standard time year-round does not require approval from Congress. Is that true? If so, it'd be pretty easy to do away with the changes. Julie, great question. We told you last night how Oregon and Washington have both passed legislation to stay on daylight saving time year-round, but they need Congress to sign off on it for that to actually happen. But what about the opposite? Could we stay on standard time permanently without Congress? Yes. Turns out Julie's right. That does not require approval from Congress. Under the Uniform Time Act, which passed in the 60s, states have two options. Either observe daylight saving time from March until November, like we do now, or opt out of daylight saving time altogether. 2 states have opted out. Hawaii and Arizona. I used to live in Arizona. This was actually pretty awesome. We should note there is one part of that state, the Navajo Reservation in northeast Arizona, that does observe daylight saving time still. And then some territories like American Samoa, Guam, and Puerto Rico also stay on standard time year-round. And again, any state can choose to do this without approval from Congress. However, we wanted to make it more difficult because that would be fun. Oregon and Washington want to stay on daylight saving time, so that would require congressional approval. We picked the more complicated one. Pick up your phone and follow us on Twitter at @TheStoryKGW or email thestory@kgw.com. With that, let's bring in Laurel Porter for the news at 6:30. Hey, Laurel.
Hi, Maggie. Thank you. Clark County residents struggling to pay their rent during the pandemic are getting some help, but spots to get rental assistance are going fast. The news at 6:30 starts now.
This is KGW News at 6:30.
And thank you for joining us. The pandemic may be waning somewhat, but the need for help paying the rent is not letting up. At least that's the case in Clark County, where federal aid continues to pour out to struggling families. Here's Tim Gordon.
The pandemic has taken